Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Unique Items. Today we're going to be looking at the new Grand Charm unique item, which is called Rotting Fissure. Rotting Fissure is only obtainable within the new Terror Zones, and it is only obtainable from Champion, Unique, and Elite monsters, so basically no trash mobs. Now, this particular item is level 75 requirement and has some very interesting effects. Most notably is the monster poison immunity is sundered when this effect is on your character. So if you have it in your cube, it obviously doesn't work. So you could potentially keep it in here until you need it. It also has a pretty massive negative of negative 75% poison resistance, which of course is going to really hurt your poison res overall. Now, you could potentially counter this by using items that have relatively high amounts of poison resistance. Like, for instance, the Death's Gloves have like 50% poison resistance, I believe. Sandstorm Tracks have a pretty high amount of poison resistance, and so forth and so on. So, you know, it's not entirely impossible to counter the negative enemy poison resistance, including the addition of small charms with specific resistances, which will come in more handy. Like, for instance, say a poison resistance 11 charm with a decent secondary effect will certainly be very nice to counter out the negative resistance. Now, what characters could potentially get the most use out of these items? Well, I think it's pretty obvious that the Poison Necromancer is one of the main characters. Another character that could get very good use out of this is the Rabies Druid. And then, of course, also the Poison Javelin Amazon. And of course, anybody can stack poison charms. So stacking poison charms on a particular character, no matter what that character may be, melee or ranged, this could also come in handy for those characters who want to stack as many poison charms as possible. Like the good old days when people used to stack like 1,000,000 poison charms in their inventory and run like a multi-shot bow Amazon or something of that nature. Now, this charm, the Sundered effect, what it does is it brings the monster's immunity down to 95%. So if a monster is poison immune and you are utilizing this charm, it will, only for you, not for anybody else, no minions, no mercenaries, no traps, no hydras. I will only for you bring that monster's resistance down to 95%. Now, this can be used in combination with abilities like Lower Resistance, which Lower Resistance, as you can see, can bring down the monster's resistance by negative 56%. So that 95% resistant monster could be brought down by 56% by Lower Resistance. Now, there are other items in the game that do not work with immune monsters. However, they do work with monsters that are broken. And those items are things like Death's Web, which have negative enemy poison resistance. The 3-piece bonus on Trangul's Wing is negative enemy poison resistance. And there is also negative enemy poison resistance on things like the Plague rune word, which is pretty decent. And I think doesn't Grief also have negative enemy poison resistance on it? Yes, negative 20 to 25%. So utilizing other items that have negative enemy poison resistance on them, you could certainly make a character that could bring down that 95% to a much lower level. And I think this is what's really important with these particular items, is that they are not, in effect, fixing your problem. In fact, if anything, they actually kind of don't fix the problem at all. What they do is they make it so that you can potentially fix the problem yourself, and including poison facets as well. Those could also be used for this. Because a monster that is 95% immune to your element is still relatively unkillable. If you guys and gals out there haven't actually tried to kill a monster that's 95% immune to your element, let me just clue you in. It's not very easy, because even if you're dishing out like 15,000 damage, if you run that on a calculator, you know, like 15,000 minus 95% means that you're dishing out only 750 per hit, where you were dishing out 15,000 before, right? So it's a pretty drastic decrease in the amount of damage that you output. So having those negative enemy resistance items like Death's Web and Trangul's is going to have a huge effect on how you can kill those monsters once they are broken. The negative resistance penalty is also very interesting, although poison isn't necessarily one that most people worry about, although it can be nasty, especially if you're fighting Lilith. For the most part, I think most people just kind of don't really bother having like too much poison resistance, as long as you're not like ridiculously in the negative and you're not like standing in Lilith's range and getting obliterated by her poison. You're usually okay. So the negative resistance on this isn't like too crazy. It is interesting to note though that for the first time ever, you could potentially build a poison Javazon and break all of the immunities with that, which I actually did build a poison Javazon a little while ago, and I utilized things like the lower resistance on the Plague Sword, because Conviction does not break poison resistance, by the way. And it has actually worked out very nicely. The other important thing to note about these is that they seem to bypass the normal penalties for things like lower resistance. So if you guys are unaware, let me just bring up my little diagram real quick, and I'll show you what I mean. I actually have a little do-jank here. So Conviction and lower resistance both suffer a penalty when they are affecting a monster that is immune. And according to my testing, at least as far as I've been able to see, is that it doesn't seem like the penalty seems to apply to the monsters that are sundered, which means that the lower resistance would instead affect the monster at its full benefit, which of course mine right now is level 56 or 56%, although it goes as high as 70. So I would be able to reduce the monster by a lot more than 14, which is the penalized version of lower resistance, and that's going to take the monster from 95% obviously down much further, and then in combination with things like my negative enemy poison resistance, which you can see right here at negative 71%, can potentially bring the monster down to the cap of negative 100%. That is the lowest that you can possibly bring a monster down to, which basically means double damage. So if you can get a monster down to 0, then your damage will dish out exactly what it states. So very clearly, like as it says right here, I have 8,394. If I bring down a monster down to 0% resistance, I'm actually dishing out 8,394 damage. However, if I can bring them down to negative 100%, then I can double that to 16,600, etc., which is certainly going to beef up my damage quite a bit. Now, one of the things that we don't know is how rare these will be. It has not been discussed yet, and you cannot actually find them in the PTR just yet. We also don't know for certain whether you can have more than one in your inventory, although you can right now. We don't know if that's maybe a bug or what's going on, but as of right now, you can have multiple of them in your inventory at the same time. Although do keep in mind that penalty, the 75% resistance penalty, is pretty severe, and is of course going to make things a little nasty for you. Now, as far as trade value goes, I do feel like the Rotting Fissure is going to be near the bottom. It's not going to be the worst. It's definitely better than the worst contender on the list, which is certainly the magic one, and we'll talk about that in another video. But the reason why the Rotting Fissure, I think, is going to be so low on the ranking is not necessarily because it's a bad charm, but just simply because there are so few characters that take advantage of poison damage. I mean, you can literally count them all on one hand. All right, so let's count them all on one hand, shall we? Poison Necro, Rabies Druid, Poison Javazon, all right, Poison Charm users, and that's it. We didn't even fill up. We didn't even use the whole hand. We still got Pinky. We still got our Pinky left. There's really not a lot of characters that utilize these charms. So I think you will find that the Rotting Fissure Grand Charm, although useful to specific characters, will be the least valuable of the lot. And I think that's pretty much everything I can cover on these. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I will be sure to answer. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we are talking about rotting fissures. And if you want to keep watching my videos, be sure to hit the subscribe button. It really helps out, and hit the like button as well. Helps the algorithm, as it were.